When I was 12 years old, I met the Queen of England. My father's latest invention, a breed of dog with the good grooming habits of a cat, had everyone in a tizzy, so the whole family got invited to Buckingham Palace. Now, usually such things didn't impress me, but the Queen of England? That was something. For weeks before our meeting, every time I thought about her, I'd burst out singing, "The Queen, the Queen, I'm going to meet the Queen." One day I asked my father what one chats about with a queen, and he said, "Oh, just be yourself, Doodlebug. Tell her how you sing whenever you think about her. It's charming." So that's what I decided to do. And finally, the big day came. And as we drove through the gates of Buckingham Palace, I began to get more and more nervous. Well, we had a 6-course dinner in a ballroom. And then, as I stood in line to greet the Queen, my stomach grew all fluttery. And suddenly there I was, standing before the great lady herself. I bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I just want to tell you that whenever I think of you, this is what I do. I opened my mouth to sing and threw up on her." Now, my mother taught me that no matter how terrible things get, it's always best to maintain your poise and dignity. So I dabbed my mouth with a tissue, stood up straight, and looked the Queen right in the eye and said, "Your Highness, I came to you wearing my heart on my sleeve, and I shall depart wearing my stomach on your blouse, and shoes, and in your hair." And then I curtsied and went home. You know, sometimes people act odd around kings and queens and famous people. And this story is about one of the most amazing examples ever. It's The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. Many years ago, there lived an emperor who loved beautiful new clothes so much that he spent all his money on being finely dressed. His only interest was in going to the theatre or in riding about in his carriage where he could show off his new clothes. He had a different costume for every hour of the day. Indeed, when it was said of other kings that they were at court, it could only be said of him that he was in his dressing room. One day, 2 swindlers came to the emperor's city. They said that they were weavers, claiming that they knew how to make the finest cloth imaginable. Not only were the colours on the patterns extraordinarily beautiful, but in addition, this material had the amazing property that it was to be invisible to anyone who was incompetent or stupid. "Well, it would be wonderful to have clothes made from that cloth," thought the emperor. "Then I would know which of my men are unfit for their positions, and I'd be able to tell clever people from stupid ones." So he immediately gave the 2 swindlers a great sum of money to weave their cloth for him. They set up their looms and pretended to go to work, although there was nothing at all on the looms. They asked for the finest silk and the purest gold, all of which they hid away, continuing to work on the empty looms, often late into the night. "I would really like to know how they're coming with the cloth," thought the emperor, but he was a bit uneasy when he recalled that anyone who was unfit for his position or stupid would not be able to see the material. Of course, he himself had nothing to fear, but still, he decided to send someone else to see how the work was progressing. "I'll send my honest old minister to the weavers," thought the emperor. "He's the best one to see how the material is coming. He's very sensible, and no one is more worthy of his position than he." So the good old minister went into the hall where the 2 swindlers sat working at their empty looms. "Goodness," thought the old minister, opening his eyes wide. "I cannot see a thing." But he did not say so. The 2 swindlers invited him to step closer, asking him if it wasn't a beautiful design, and if the colours weren't magnificent. They pointed to the empty loom, and the poor old minister opened his eyes wider and wider. He still could see nothing, for nothing was there. "Oh, gracious," he thought, "is it possible that I am stupid? I've never thought so. Am I unfit for my position? No one must know this. No, it will never do for me to say that I was unable to see the material." "You aren't saying anything," said one of the weavers. "Oh, it is magnificent, the very best," said the old minister, peering through his glasses. "This pattern and these colours, oh yes, I'll tell the emperor that I am very satisfied with it." "Oh, that makes us happy," said the 2 weavers, and they called the colours and the unusual pattern by name. The old minister listened closely so that he would be able to say the exact same things when he reported back to the emperor, and that is exactly what he did. The swindlers now asked for more money, more silk, and more gold, all of which they hid away. Then they continued to weave away as before on the empty looms. The emperor sent other officials as well to observe the weavers' progress. They too were startled when they saw nothing, and they too reported back to him how wonderful the material was, advising him to have it made into clothes that he could wear in a grand procession. The entire city was alive in praise of the cloth. Magnifique, splendito, excellent, they said in all languages. The emperor awarded the swindlers with medals of honor, bestowing on each of them the title Lord Weaver. The swindlers stayed up the entire night before the procession was to take place, burning more than 16 candles. Everyone could see that they were in a great rush to finish the emperor's new clothes. They pretended to take the material from the looms. They cut in the air with large scissors. They sewed with needles, but without any thread. And finally they announced, "Behold, the clothes are finished." The emperor came to them with his most distinguished cavaliers. The two swindlers raised their arms as though they were holding something and said, "Just look at these trousers. Here is the jacket. This is the cloak," and so forth. "They are as light as spider webs. You might think you didn't have a thing on, but that is the good thing about them." "Yes," said the cavaliers, but they couldn't see a thing, for nothing was there. "Would his majesty, if it pleases his grace, kindly remove his clothes," said the swindlers. "Then we will fit you with the new ones here in front of the large mirror." The emperor took off all his clothes, and the swindlers pretended to dress him piece by piece with the new ones that were to be fitted. They took hold of his waist and pretended to tie something about him. It was the train. Then the emperor turned and looked into the mirror. "Oh, goodness, they suit you well. What a wonderful fit," they all said. "What a pattern, what colors, such luxurious clothes." "The canopy to be carried above your majesty awaits outside," said the Grand Master of Ceremonies. "Yes, I am ready," said the emperor. "Don't they fit well?" He turned once again toward the mirror, because it had to appear as though he were admiring himself in all his glory. The chamberlains who were to carry the train held their hands just above the floor, as if they were picking up the train. As they walked, they pretended to hold the train high, for they could not let anyone notice that they could see nothing. The emperor walked beneath the beautiful canopy in the procession, and all the people in the street and in their windows said, "Oh, goodness, the emperor's new clothes are incomparable. What a beautiful train on his jacket. Oh, what a perfect fit." No one wanted it to be noticed that he could see nothing, for then it would be said that he was unfit for his position or that he was stupid. None of the emperor's clothes had ever before received such praise. "But he doesn't have anything on," said a small child. "Good Lord, let us hear the voice of an innocent child," said the father, and whispered to another what the child had said. "A small child said that he doesn't have anything on." Well, finally everyone was saying, "Well, he doesn't have anything on." And the emperor shuddered, for he knew that they were right. But he thought, well, the procession must go on. And he carried himself even more proudly, and the chamberlains walked along behind, carrying the train that wasn't there. The end. Oh, hello. When I was a little girl, there was an odd little man at the end of my street who lived in an oak tree. It was a very old tree, and he lived in a hollow part of the trunk where he'd put a chair, a table, and a small bed. Of course, every kid in the neighborhood thought that this was the nuttiest thing they'd ever seen. And whenever we walked by the tree, we'd point and giggle. But our parents warned us not to talk to the little man because he was clever and tricky. One day, I couldn't resist. I was walking by with my friends, and we saw the little man sweeping out his house with a tiny broom. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "Why do you live in a tree? There must be a better place to live." The little man smiled and said, "Why, if that's true, young lady, then why do you live in a tree?" "I don't," I said. "Oh, I'm quite certain you do," he said. "I'll even make you a bet on it. If you win, I'll give you this gold coin. But if I win, you have to come clean my house once a week for a year." But of course, I took the bet because I knew I didn't live in a tree. And then the little man pointed and said, "Is that your house over there?" "Yes," I said. "And what is it made of?" "Wood," I said. "And where does wood come from?" "Trees," I said. "So if your house is made of wood and wood is really trees, when you get right down to it, you live inside a tree," he said. And that, my friends, is how I wound up vacuuming, mopping, and dusting an oak tree for 1 year. And now here's a story that I'm going to read about another kind of tree. This is a tree that gets a very special job at Christmas time. It's by Hans Christian Andersen, and it's called The Fir Tree. Far down in the forest, where the warm sun and the fresh air made a sweet resting place, grew a pretty little fir tree, and yet it was not happy. It wished so much to be tall like its companions, the pines and the firs which grew around it. The sun shone, and the soft air fluttered its leaves, and the little peasant children passed by prattling merrily, but the fir tree heeded them not. Sometimes the children would bring a large basket of raspberries or strawberries and seat themselves near the fir tree and say, "Is it not a pretty little tree?" which made it feel more unhappy than before. And yet, all this while, the tree grew a notch or joint taller every year, for by the number of joints in the stem of a fir tree, we can discover its age. Still, as it grew, it complained, "Oh, how I wish I were as tall as the other trees. Then I would spread out my branches on every side, and my top would overlook the wide world. I should have the birds building their nests on my boughs, and when the wind blew, I should bow with stately dignity like my tall companions." The tree was so discontented that it took no pleasure in the warm sunshine, the birds, or the rosy clouds that floated over it morning and evening. Sometimes, in winter, when the snow lay white and glittering on the ground, a rabbit would come springing along and jump right over the little tree. Oh, and then how mortified it would feel. 2 winters passed, and when the third arrived, the tree had grown so tall that the rabbit was obliged to run around it. Yet it remained unsatisfied, and would exclaim, "Oh, if I could but keep on growing tall and old! There's nothing else worth caring for in the world." In the autumn, as usual, the woodcutters came and cut down several of the tallest trees, and the young fir tree, which was now grown to its full height, shuddered as the noble trees fell to the earth with a crash, and the branches were lopped off. The trunks looked so slender and bare that they could scarcely be recognized, and then they were placed upon wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where were they going? What would become of them? The young fir tree wished very much to know, so in the spring, when the swallows and the storks came, it asked, "Do you know where those trees were taken? Did you meet them?" The swallows knew nothing, but the stork, after a little reflection, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I do. I met several new ships when I flew from Egypt, and they had fine masts that smelt like fir. I think these must have been the trees. I assure you they were stately,
very stately. "Oh, how I wish I were tall enough to go on the sea," said the fir tree. "What is the sea, and what does it look like?" "Well, it would take too much time to explain," said the stork, flying quickly away. "Rejoice in thy youth," said the sunbeam. "Rejoice in thy fresh growth and the young life that is in thee." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew watered it with tears. But the fir tree regarded them not. Christmas time drew near, and many young trees were cut down, even some smaller and younger than the fir tree, who enjoyed neither rest nor peace with longing to leave its forest home. These young trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept their branches, and were also laid on wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. "Where are they going?" asked the fir tree. "They're not taller than I am. Indeed, one is much less. And why are the branches not cut off? Where are they going?" We know," said the sparrows. "We have looked in at the windows of the houses in the town, and we know what is done with them. They are dressed up in the most splendid manner. We've seen them standing in the middle of a warm room and adorned with all sorts of beautiful things, honey cakes, gilded apples, playthings, and many hundreds of candles." "Well, and then," asked the fir tree, trembling through all its branches, "and then what happens?" "We do not see any more," said the sparrows. "But this was enough for us." "I wonder whether anything so brilliant will ever happen to me," thought the fir tree. "It would be much better than crossing the sea. I long for it almost with pain. Oh, when will Christmas be here? I'm now as tall and well grown as those others which were taken away last year. Oh, that I were now laid on the wagon, or standing in the warm room with all that brightness and splendor around me. Something better and more beautiful is to come after, or the trees would not be so decked out. Yes, what follows will be grander and more splendid. What can it be? I am weary with longing. I scarcely know how I feel." "Rejoice with us," said the air and the sunlight. "Enjoy thine own bright life in the fresh air." But the tree would not rejoice. Though it grew taller every day, in winter and summer, its dark green foliage might be seen in the forest, while passers-by would say, "What a beautiful tree!" A short time before Christmas, the discontented fir tree was the first to fall. As the axe cut through the stem and divided the pith, the tree fell with a groan to the earth, conscious of pain and faintness, and forgetting all its anticipations of happiness in sorrow at leaving its home in the forest. It knew that it should never again see its dear old companions, the trees, nor the little bushes and many-colored flowers that had grown by its side. Perhaps not even the birds. Neither was the journey at all pleasant. The tree first recovered itself while being unpacked in the courtyard of a house with several other trees, and it heard a man say, "We only want one, and this is the prettiest." Then came two servants in grand livery, and carried the fir tree into a large and beautiful apartment. On the walls hung pictures, and near the great stove stood great china vases with lions on the lids. And there were rocking chairs, silken sofas, large tables covered with pictures, books, and playthings worth a great deal of money. At least, that's what the children said. And then the fir tree was placed in a large tub full of sand, with green fabric all hung around it, so that no one could see it was a tub. And it stood on a very handsome carpet. How the young fir tree trembled! Oh, what was going to happen to him now? Some young ladies came, and the servants helped them to adorn the tree. On one branch they hung little bags cut out of colored paper, and each bag was filled with sweetmeats. From other branches hung gilded apples and walnuts, as if they had grown there, and above and all around were hundreds of red, blue, and white candles, which were fastened on the branches. Dolls, exactly like real babies, were placed under the green leaves. The tree had never seen such things before, and at the very top was fastened a glittering star made of tinsel. Oh, it was very beautiful. This evening, they all exclaimed. "How bright it will be!" "Oh, that the evening were to come," thought the tree, "and the candles lighted, and then I shall know what else is going to happen. Will the trees of the forest come to see me? Oh, I wonder if the sparrows will peep in at the windows as they fly. Shall I grow faster here and keep on all the ornaments, summer and winter?" But guessing was of very little use. It made his bark ache, and this pain is as bad for a slender fir tree as a headache is for us. At last the candles were lighted, and then what a glistening blaze of light the tree presented. Oh, it trembled so with joy in all its branches that one of the candles fell among the green leaves and burnt some of them. "Help! Oh, help!" exclaimed the young ladies. But there was no danger, for they quickly extinguished the fire. And after this the tree tried not to tremble at all, though the fire frightened him. He was so anxious not to hurt any of the beautiful ornaments, even while their brilliancy dazzled him. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they intended to upset the tree. They were followed more silently by their elders, and for a moment the little ones stood silent with astonishment, and then they shouted for joy till the room rang, and they danced merrily round the tree, while one present after another was taken from it. "What are they doing? What will happen next?" thought the fir. At last the candles burnt down to the branches and were put out, and then the children received permission to plunder the tree. Oh, how they rushed upon it, till the branches cracked, and had it not been fastened with the glistening star to the ceiling, well, it must have been thrown down. Well, the children then danced about with their pretty toys, and no one noticed the tree, except the children's maid, who came and peeped among the branches to see if an apple or a fig had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, pulling a little fat man towards the tree. "Now we shall be in the green shade," said the man as he seated himself under it, "and the tree will have the pleasure of hearing also. But shall I relate only one story? What shall it be? Rapunzel, or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs but soon got up again, and at last married a princess?" "Oh, Rapunzel!" cried some. "Humpty Dumpty!" cried others, and there was a fine shouting and crying out. But the fir tree remained quite still, and thought to himself, "Shall I have anything to do with all this?" But he had already amused them as much as they wished. And then the old man told them the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell downstairs and was raised up again and married a princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, "Oh, tell another, tell another," for they wanted to hear the story of Rapunzel. But they only had Humpty Dumpty. And after this, the fir tree became quite silent and thoughtful. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet married a princess. "Ah, yes, so it happens in the world," thought the fir tree. He believed it all, because it was related by such a nice man. "Ah, well," he thought, "who knows? Perhaps I may fall down too and marry a princess." And he looked forward joyfully to the next evening, expecting to be again decked out with lights and playthings, gold and fruit. "Tomorrow I will not tremble," thought he. "I will enjoy all my splendor, and I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Rapunzel." And the tree remained quiet and thoughtful all night. In the morning, the servants and the housemaid came in. "Now," thought the fir, "all my splendor is going to begin again." But they dragged him out of the room and upstairs to the garret, and threw him on the floor in a dark corner where no daylight shone, and there they left him. "What does this mean?" thought the tree. "What am I to do here? I can hear nothing in a place like this." And he had time enough to think, for days and nights passed, and no one came near him, and when at last somebody did come, it was only to put away some large boxes in a corner. So the tree was completely hidden from sight, as if it had never existed. "It is winter now," thought the tree. "The ground is hard and covered with snow, so that people cannot plant me. I shall be sheltered here, I dare say, until spring comes. How thoughtful and kind everyone is to me. Still I wish this place were not so dark, as well as lonely, with not even a little rabbit to look at. How pleasant it was out in the forest while the snow lay on the ground, when the rabbit would run by, and yes, which would jump over me too, although I did not like it then. Oh, it's terribly lonely here. Squeak, squeak, said Little Mouse, creeping cautiously towards the tree, and then came another, and they both sniffed at the fir tree and crept between the branches. Oh, it is very cold, said the Little Mouse, or else we should be so comfortable here, shouldn't we, you old fir tree? Well, I'm not so old, said the fir tree. There are many who are older than I am. Where do you come from, and what do you know? Asked the mice, who were full of curiosity. Have you seen the most beautiful places in the world? And can you tell us about all of them? And have you been in the storeroom where the cheeses lie on the shelf and hams hang from the ceiling, and one can run about on tallow candles there and go in thin and come out fat? Well, I know nothing of that place, said the fir tree, but I know the wood where the sun shines and birds sing. And then the tree told the little mice all about its youth. They had never heard such an account in their lives, and after they had listened to it attentively, they said, "What a number of things you've seen! You must have been very happy." "Happy?" exclaimed the fir tree, and then as he reflected upon what he'd been telling them, he said, "Oh, yes, after all those were happy days." But when he went on and related all about Christmas Eve and how he'd been dressed up with cakes and lights, the mice said, "Well, how happy you must have been, you old fir tree." "I am not old at all," replied the tree. "I only came from the forest this winter, but I could no longer grow." "What splendid stories you relate to us," said the little mice, and the next night 4 other mice came with them to hear what the tree had to tell. And the more he talked, and the more he remembered, well, then he thought to himself, well, those were happy days, but they may come again. Well, Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Perhaps I may marry a princess too. And the fir tree thought of the pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, which was to him a real beautiful princess. "Who is Humpty Dumpty?" asked the little mice. And then the tree related the whole story. He could remember every single word, and the little mice were so delighted with it that they were ready to jump to the top of the tree. And the next night, a great many more mice made their appearance, and on Sunday 2 rats came with them. But they said it was not a pretty story at all, and the little mice were very sorry, for they made it also think a little bit less of the story. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only one," replied the fir tree. "I heard it on the happiest evening of my life, but I did not know I was so happy at the time." "Well, we think it's a very miserable story," said the rats. "Don't you know any stories about bacon or tallow in the storeroom?" "No," replied the tree. "Well, many thanks to you then," replied the rats, and they marched off. Well, the little mice also kept away after this, and the tree sighed and said, "Well, it was very pleasant when the merry little mice sat around me and listened when I talked. Now, that is all past too. However, I shall consider myself happy when someone comes to take me out of this place. But would this would ever happen?" Yet, one morning, people came to clear out the garret. The boxes were packed away, and the tree was pulled out of the corner and thrown roughly on the garret floor, and then the servants dragged it out upon the staircase where the daylight shone. "Now life is beginning again," said the tree, rejoicing in the sunshine and fresh air, and then it was carried downstairs and taken out into the courtyard so quickly that it forgot to think of itself and could only look about. There was so much to be seen. The court was so close to a garden where everything looked blooming. Fresh and fragrant roses hung over the little palings, and the linden trees were in blossom, while the swallows flew here and there, crying, "Twit, twit, twit, my mate is coming." But it was not the fir tree they meant. "Now I shall live," cried the tree, joyfully spreading out its branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow. and it lay in a corner amongst weeds and nettles. The star of gold paper still stuck in the top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the same courtyard, two of the merry children were playing who had danced around the tree at Christmas and had been so happy. The youngest saw the gold star and ran and pulled it off the tree. "Look what's sticking to the ugly old fir tree," said the child, treading on the branches till they cracked under his boots. And the tree saw all the fresh bright flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished it had remained in the dark corner of the garret. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, and of the merry Christmas evening, and of the little mice who had listened to the story of Humpty Dumpty. "Past, past," said the old tree. "Oh, had I but enjoyed myself when I could have done so! But now it's too late." Then a lad came and chopped the tree into small pieces till a large bundle lay in a heap on the ground. The pieces were placed in a fire under the copper, and they quickly blazed up brightly, while the tree sighed so deeply that each sigh was like a pistol shot. And then the children who were at play came and seated themselves in front of the fire and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop!" But at each pop, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer day in the forest, and of Christmas evening, and of Humpty Dumpty, the only story it had ever heard or knew how to relate, till at last it was consumed. The boys still played in the garden, and the youngest wore the golden star on his breast, with which the tree had been adorned during the happiest evening of its existence. Now all was past. The tree's life was past, and the story also. For all stories must come to an end at last. The end.